The rule when I'm speaking? Get up and move around anytime. You know, I've been to, last year was my 11th lecture tour to Australia. And it's a wonderful country. And they love brain function, and it's hard not to love people who love what you do. So we've been talking about the fact that 50% of people tested learn best if they learn at all when they're standing and moving. And what are you told to do when you go to school or church? Sit down, fold your hands, shut up, don't move. And that doesn't work for 50% of people, especially for males. So if a male even gets in the congregation and he has to sit there, he will sleep. That's all there is to it. So now a school district in Australia is putting in their schools through second year of college half sitting and half standing desks. And kids can move back and forth whatever they need to do, and they're going to very carefully track and see how this affects grades, school attendance, behaviors, all kinds of things. So I'll tell you, it really works. All right. Thanks to the PA people, by the way. I haven't squeaked once. Not even once. And everything is working. I mean, that's the only problem with being a speaker and go around the world, because you have no control who's in the AV booth. And this church has it handled. All right. I made this presentation back in Texas. And I've been asked to do it multiple times since. So here you go. And if I can go fast enough, we'll have a few minutes for questions. Otherwise, Catherine Taylor. I mean, I don't know where all these Taylors are coming from.
We're the one true remnant.
Or we may be the one true disillusioned group. Who knows? All right. 2 research updates. One related to how different brains, mainly male brains and female brains, respond to stressors, and the wiring differences that clearly are showing up in a brand new type of brain scan called DTI, diffusion tensor imaging. And it's all fun. I just love this. I know you can't tell, but I really, really like brain function information. So stress in the brain, first section. People say to me, oh man, I wish that we could get the stress out of our lives. And I go, well, the minute you have no stress in your life, you're history. Because stress is living. All it means is that you can ask your brain and body to do something different and it can respond. I can run into the other building and I can change my clothes and my brain can help me do that. If my brain didn't help me do that, it would be a problem. 3 main categories of stress, just for purposes of, remember that when you read about stress. Eustress is positive stress. It helps you grow. I'm under eustress the whole day today. Because public speaking is the #1 fear in the United States. It even beats out flying. So there's some stress in presenting this information, this topic especially. But it helps me grow, so it's not a problem. Distress is outright negative stress. You want to avoid it if you can. Last August, there was a 7.1 earthquake 3 miles from my house, and it altered a lot of things in my home. I would like to have avoided that, and that would be an example of distress. And then there's mistress, and please notice how it's spelled. Because the first time I talked about this, I said mistress, and that's as far as I got, and the lady put up her hand and she said, I know about that. My husband's had 3 of them. I said, well, you know, the definition is hidden stress. I don't know how hidden that was. It might just be outright distress. But hidden stress is you have long commutes, you sit too long at the computer without getting up and exercising, and don't get enough sleep. Sleep is independently linked with longevity. If you mismanage distress and mistress, you can kill brain cells. But it is different strokes for different folks. Our stress responses are typically learned in childhood, in the way the adults in your family, your community, your church, your school manage stress, and you either follow that or do 180 degrees different. And that's what the research suggests. And my brain's opinion is 180 degrees from dysfunctional is still dysfunctional. It's just different. So we need to really learn good stress management concepts. It's related to perception flexibility. How bad do you think somebody is? How flexible are you in coming up with a different way to deal with it? Because you learned it, you can unlearn it and or relearn more effective ways to deal with stress. Every human being needs stress management strategies, my brain's opinion, especially in today's world, but the female brain may need it even more than the male brain, because female brains are twice as vulnerable to stress-related disorders, two of which are depression and PTSD. And now researchers have discovered with rat studies that each brain handles stress very differently, and I want to expose you to that information. In the first section, we talked about substances in the body, chemicals, that are both hormones and neurotransmitters. Remember that? Hallelujah. All right. Well, you know, it's never for sure. So statistically, women, as I mentioned, are at higher risk for depression and PTSD, likely because of something called corticotropin releasing factor, or CRF. And I don't know if you've heard of that before, but here it is again. It's a neurotransmitter and a hormone. And we think that has something to do with this. In response to a stressor, the hypothalamus that is in this middle part of the brain, the second brain layer, it releases CRF. And CRF goes throughout the body and attaches itself to something called receptor molecules on the surface of a cell. So it's released down here in the brain stem in a little part of the brain called the locus coeruleus. Not important that you remember that, but some people like to know the label. So there's a little piece in the brainstem called the locus coeruleus, and when the hypothalamus releases that CRF, it goes right to this alarm center and starts attaching itself to the cells, if you will. This release of CRF telegraphs throughout the brain and body a heightened emotional arousal, which influences sleep, alertness, most likely connected with the fight-flight response. Now that's a good thing if it's a real, genuine emergency and you need this CRF to help you get through it. But much of stress is preventable. It depends on how your brain perceives a particular event or situation. And you can perceive it as horrible, or you can perceive it as manageable. It's called hyperarousal because everything gets put on alert. It can be really helpful for this brief amount of time while you decide how you're going to handle a stressor, but if it becomes chronic, then you're in for trouble. And the way the researchers say it is this: runaway CRF is a core feature of depression. Who's diagnosed with depression in this country more often, males or females? They are. 1 to 10 sometimes. I don't think that necessarily reflects that males don't have stress, but it does reflect the way in which we now believe the female brain reacts with CRF. So CRF is hugely powerful. Here's a few of the things it can do. It can completely suppress appetite. Well, think of anorexia. People with anorexia usually perceive that they have very, very stressful lives, pour out CRF, and appetite is suppressed. It increases subjective anxiety. It's linked with euphoric feelings that accompany alcoholism, which is one of the reasons it can be very difficult to break the alcoholism cycle, because CRF is involved with that cycle. It definitely triggers inflammation to the point that researchers are now investigating the potential link between CRF and multiple sclerosis. And this I find fascinating. High levels of CRF have been found in the cerebrospinal fluid of 1, individuals who are very depressed, and 2, individuals who have committed suicide. Now, there's been a real stigma about suicide, you know. On the maternal side of my family, we're all French Catholic. And anybody who kills themselves doesn't get buried in the Catholic cemetery, do they? They get buried somewhere out in the ditch somewhere, which just increases the stress for the family members who are left behind. Well, here's the research. Nobody kills themselves unless their brain is in an altered state. And the state gets altered by this powerful CRF. So we need to take another look at that. I remember going to a funeral one time when I was about 9, and somebody had killed themselves, and the well-meaning but totally unenlightened person who was doing the funeral, well, we didn't have this information yet, said, you know, it's really too bad that this person will not be going to heaven. And back then I thought that was horrible. But it's total misunderstanding of what happens when the internal pain is so great that that stress causes the release of lots of CRF. That brain is in an altered state. So rats make really good research objects, research animals, because whether you like it or not, the rat brain is very like the human brain. Almost said the female brain. Very like the human brain. So if somebody calls you a rat, that's not a problem. I mean, they got the same kind of peptides, those neurotransmitter things. They've got the same ones that you find in a human brain. So they decided that they wanted to see if they could get any idea of the reason that the female brain seems to be twice at risk for depression and PTSD. So they looked at male and female rats. And what they found is, I think, staggering. So here is a drawing of a neuron down in the brain stem in that locus coeruleus alarm center. Something has happened to stress this brain. And in terms of rat studies, often it's something as simple as they put them in a big tub of water and just let them swim and swim and swim and swim, and they haul them out before they drown. But they can swim for 3 or 4 days, which is a lot of chronic stress for that little rat brain. Their conclusion was that the stressed female rat, the brain acted macho as the brain became stressed. What does that mean? All right, here, look at these little blue things. These are known as receptor molecules. And I don't care what metaphor you use to remember this. One that's easy for me is that these are windows into that neuron, and you can enter through the window. And because all the windows are open, the storm blows right in. So what happens when this CRF is released and come to these windows or docking stations, they're all open, and so all of that CRF flows into that neuron, and it makes it very reactive because CRF is so powerful. Notice these little green things. They're not doing diddly. They're just sitting there. The door just opened, and I don't know who it is. All right, it didn't stress me, however. I mean, how bad can it be in a church? All right, now let's look at the male rat brain. Same blue little docking stations or windows. But when the male rat brain gets stressed, these little green things called arrestins, they're proteins, they get busy and start doing something. I have no idea the reason they don't do anything in the female brain. Nobody knows. But in the male brain, they start closing the windows. Duh. Or they start pulling in the docking stations, whichever metaphor you want. One's already in, one's just getting released, this one's coming in. They may pull in another one or two. And the bottom line is it doesn't get very much CRF because all of the avenues through which the CRF can go into the cell are reduced by at least half. And so the male brain has toned down reaction. Read my lips. Men, you tend to underreact to stressors. Women, you tend to overreact to stressors. What can you do to help each other? It's unhelpful for a woman to be off the wall because she's so stressed and her husband says, it's not that big a deal, just take a deep breath, get over it. By the same token, sometimes he underestimates really how bad something is. And the only way I know of that you can come to the middle is to talk about it. And she can be saying, this is horrible and I don't think I can live through it. And he'll say, you know, it doesn't seem that bad to me, but I may be underreacting. So tell me what you perceive as so bad. And now let's see if we can come to a solution that we can both live with. And that's how we help each other, if you understand that it's possible to do so. So you can find this on my website, and you can go to the article, and it's actually written in pretty readable English. You know, sometimes the research is really hard to understand, but this is pretty readable. And you can read it yourself if you want to. So here we have the female neuron from the locus coeruleus in the brain stem. All of the windows are open. All of the docking stations are open. The green things aren't doing anything. And here we come to the male brain, and they're running around shutting the windows, pulling in the docking stations, so that eventually there'll probably be only half as many opportunities for CRF to get into that cell. Got it? Got it. Fabulous. All right. Deborah Van Gasser, who is a researcher in this area, this is what she says. The female alarm system is more sensitive to stressors and to CRF, period. Even in the absence of stressors, the female stress signaling system is more sensitive from the start. We know from studies that a female fetus inside a woman who's living in an extremely stressful environment and is very stressed will actually have her brain develop and wire differently than it would have if the mother had not been under stress, and that can impact that female child her whole life. If she is also under stress for the first 2 years because the brain continues to develop, again, her brain may actually develop differently than it would have had she not been under that stress. And this is the bottom line. Lack of receptor internalization. When you see that in the article, all it's meaning is the windows don't close. You know, nobody pulls in the docking stations. Lack of receptor internalization could translate into impaired ability to cope with high levels of CRF, depression, and PTSD being 2 examples. I've had some experience with that. For the last half century, I've worked with people with addictive behaviors, and those especially coming back from wars that have PTSD. Not everybody who goes to war gets PTSD. Do you know the approximate percentage of people who come back with PTSD? About 20%. That means 1 in every 5 people will come back with some level of PTSD. A couple of years ago, I stopped working for Adventist Health, and I'm doing what I love now full time. Not that I didn't like what I did, but I love this. But before I retired, I was working with people who came back from Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, wherever, with PTSD. And the male with PTSD, if he really wants to get over PTSD, I suppose that's the only way to say it, and stop, a lot of the symptoms and the flashbacks and everything. If he really is serious, work with him for 9 to 12 months and he'll be in pretty good shape. When I left, we were still working with women who were back 10 years from Afghanistan, and they just could not seem to recover from PTSD. And nobody knew why, but I think this is partly the explanation for that. Your brain is the first body system to react to a stressor. It can stimulate a stress response for up to 72 hours after something stressful happens. What does that mean? It means that you pour out cortisol and adrenaline and any other number of stress hormones, including CRF, for about 72 hours after a stressful event. Now here's the kicker. You can keep doing that for years if you keep rehearsing the event. It's important to articulate what happened to you to somebody that you can trust, but then I tell people, I've heard it, stop with what happened. Now we're going to only talk about what you are going to do to recover from this. Because the more you keep rehearsing, the more you continually trigger the stress response. And that's pretty lethal. I was speaking at a Christian women's retreat in another country, and a lady came up to me and she said, "Can I talk to you after the meeting?" I said, "Okay." After the meeting, she said, "I want to tell you what happened to me." And I was tired and didn't ask the questions that would have been helpful. I said, "Okay." And she launched into this description of a brutal assault that had happened to her and was crying and carrying on. And after about 15 minutes, I said, "Okay, I think I have it." "But I haven't finished telling you." I said, "I think I have it. My question is now," and I'm thinking it happened day before yesterday. I said, "When did this happen?" 37 years ago. She'd been rehearsing in a Broadway winning style for 37 years. Of course you can't recover. All you do is keep triggering stress hormones. The stressors do interact with the brain in a predictable equation, and here it is. 20% of any negative impact to your brain and body is due to the event. 80% is due to your perception of the event. And that comes from work from Epictetus, who was a 2nd century, I point that out, Greek philosopher. Because the first time that I really got this, I was visiting in Greece. And I came back, and the next group I was talking to, I said, "Oh, I just got the most wonderful information, from Epictetus on my trip to Greece." And somebody said, "Did you get to meet Epictetus?" No, I didn't. But I'm really careful now to make sure I put 2nd century there. But this truly goes back to Paul's admonition in Philippians to be anxious about nothing. And I say that to people, and without exception. Somebody will say, "Oh, well, there's some things we should be anxious about." No, there is nothing you should be anxious about. Something happens, you evaluate it, you deal with it. Anxiety will downshift your brain, which those of you who got one of the DVDs will better understand after you watch it. So we are to be anxious for nothing. That's been turned into one of the 20/80 rules. There are several of them. I want you to read this with me. Only 20% of any negative effect to brain and body is due to the event. 80% is due to your perception of the event and the weight you give to it. Even when you can't do anything about the 20%, you can do almost everything about the 80% because you create your own perceptions and determine your level of flexibility. That is really exciting news. It means you no longer have to be at the mercy of whatever happens to you. And as a preacher's kid, you know, I was brought up in Bible stories, and when I got this research, I thought about Paul and Silas singing where? In prison. Could they do anything about the prison? Nope. What were they dealing with? The perception. And what were they doing to get the 80% going? Singing. So we need to take another look at that. All right, that's the first piece of research. Second piece of research, diffusion tensor imaging, or DTI. It's pretty exciting. Here's a drawing of a neuron, and here is the axon, that long projection from the neuron. They're not very long in my body. You know, I'm 5'1", so I've probably got, the longest axon I've got is probably something like 4 feet, 7 inches. But I met a guy last week who is 8 feet, 3 inches tall. I got a crook in my neck just saying hello. So he's got axons that go from the brain stem all the way down to his toe, and must be like 7 feet, 11 inches, something like that. It's amazing. And then there would be a space here, and now here is this cluster of little sacs that hold the neurotransmitters that carry information across Hong Kong Harbor, I put it. And they would be then connecting with the dendrites, the little fingers on the neuron. It's just amazing. Now, DTI outlines the paths of these axons so you can see which part of the brain is connected with another part of the brain. It creates what they call a neural map of connections, and we call them connectomes. So here's a connectome, and it shows you which part of the brain is connected with another part of the brain. Pennsylvania University is doing a lot of research, and they have, in their little amount of time, already identified 100 connections, regions in the brain that are connected. And of course, researchers are never satisfied to just look at one type of brain. They always want to compare. And so it's really easy, of course, to compare the differences in these connectomes between male and female brains. Now, we have known for 15, 20 years at least, that this largest bridge, corpus callosum, appears to be different in the female brain than the male brain. The female brain has more axons of larger diameter than the male brain. It's not good or bad, right or wrong, it's just different. But that also gives the male brain some of its giftedness. Here's a side view of the male brain. And this is a connectome pattern of the male brain. And what you basically see is that the axons run up and down primarily in each side, in each hemisphere. And where you see these little red dots here, and you can see part of the cerebellum, that's the only place in the entire male brain where there were more connections between the hemispheres than there were up and down. And that has everything to do with motor control. And males are statistically much better at motor control using muscles. So, for example, I love Winter Olympics because I was born in Canada, and we only had 3 days of summer. And so I love to watch Winter Olympics. And for example, one of my favorite things is, they've made this big slide and covered it with snow and all of that. And so we got a skier standing up on the top, and he's going to come down that slide and just go right off the end and then flip around 37 times in the air and lands on his skis. I mean, it's just amazing. Well, they have a similar now event for women, but the criteria is entirely different because they don't have as much muscle and they don't have this motor control ability that's built into the male brain. So they'll do it, but it's much more fun to watch the men because it's much harder. Now, here's looking at the male brain from the top down. Do you see that? And we got some little connections across here. And researchers now believe that just the difference in wiring has a lot to do with the spatial skills that are much better in the male brain. Motor muscle control, map reading, direction finding, vehicle driving, they're much more skilled drivers. Yes, I know they have 14% more accidents per mile driven. But that's not because they're not better, more skilled drivers. It's because they act out their emotions. They kick the cat or crash the car, one of the two. How many women are on the Indy 500 circuit? One. Has she ever won? I don't know if she ever will. I mean, she has an unusual brain. Must have had more testosterone while she was in utero. I don't know. But, it's amazing. But there's only one. Translating perception to motor skills is in some sports. Okay, you got that picture in your brain of the way the male brain's wired? Up and down means yes. Okay. Now, there's the side view of a female brain. What do you notice that's different? Hardly anything's going up and down. I mean, they got a little bit here, but most of it is all clustered around the frontal lobes, going back and forth between the hemispheres. They have many, many, many more connections than in the male brain. There you're looking at it from the top down, and that's even more dramatic. And that, researchers believe, accounts for better verbal skills, intuitive abilities, memory test results, this is remembering faces, social cognition test results that attempt to measure empathy and EQ skills. That doesn't mean men don't have them, but it appears that that's easier to use in the female brain. So look at this. It's just amazing. I was talking to a CHP. No, I didn't get pulled over, but my son is a CHP officer, and I got calluses on my knees. That's nothing I ever wanted him to go into, but whatever. He loves it. So I was talking about this, and he started laughing, and he says, "Mom, just tell people, the female brain spends a lot more time on the road. The bridge that connects the two hemispheres." All right, so here's the comparison side by side. Female brain, male brain. Now let me give you a couple of quick little practical things that this probably relates to. There are 4 core emotions. They're the only ones I talk about because those are the ones that you can see on the face of the fetus during pregnancy, depending on what's happening to the mother. They are joy, anger, fear, and sadness. 4 core emotions. In PET scan studies, when a brain is joyful and happy, it's the left hemisphere that lights up. So joy appears to be aligned with the left hemisphere. The other 3 are protective emotions. They're given to us to help us manage certain specific situations: anger, fear, and sadness. And in brain scan studies, when the person was experiencing anger or fear or sadness, the right hemisphere lit up. Language is here in the frontal left lobe, that prioritizing lobe. So exaggerate this to remember it. The female brain has a multi-lane freeway connecting both hemispheres. The male brain has a little tiny, skinny, pathetic one-lane road. It can get from one side to the other, but it's not easy. And if a couple doesn't know this, they can have all kinds of problems. He may be in the right hemisphere, and he may be angry or fearful or sad. Maybe not. Maybe he's just doing a right-brained activity. But his wife here, who's buzzing around on the freeway, spending a lot of time driving back and forth, here she was doing something here and remembered she hadn't done something here, so over the freeway and do that for a while, and then, oh, I didn't finish this and do that. Back and forth all the time. He's not like that. Whichever side of the brain he is in, the other one is idling. It takes less energy to run the male brain because if one side's on, nothing's happening in the other. Meaning, lights are on here, air conditioning, whatever. In this side, nothing's happening. It's just the dark room waiting in case you want to come over there and do something. But here's language. This part of the brain, the same part of the brain that has language, is also the part of the brain where you use tools. So she doesn't know this, and he's over here doing something in the right hemisphere. Maybe he's putting together a swing set for the grandkids in the backyard, and he doesn't even read the instructions, which ticks me right off, but nevertheless. He's over here putting the swing set together, and she says, "Hon, I just bought a new painting for the living room. Could you come and hang it?" Okay, women, never ask him if he can do something. Ever. Because that just kicks in his self-esteem issues. Could you do it? Of course I could do it. What do you think I am, a nerd? You ask them, would you do this? The assumption then is that you know he can do it. Would you do this for me? But she doesn't know that, so she says, could you come and hang the picture? Okay, he's busy and he really doesn't want to turn all the lights out and shut off the AC and cross this little minuscule road, turn all the lights on, turn on the AC, go up here where you use tools, and now he's ready to do that. He'd rather finish over here first. Makes sense to me. But none of them really realize this, so he says, in a minute, when I'm done with this. She goes, can't you do it now? Well, I'd like to finish this first. But can't you leave that and come and do this and go back to that? Yeah, he could, but it's a process. It's going to take him some time to do all of this. So if you know that, women, you write a list. And you say, would you please hang the picture, take out the garbage, get the garbage disposal in the sink working, whatever. And gentlemen, you know what part of the brain it's going to take you to do that, even if you don't realize it consciously. Memorize the list. And when you're in that part of the brain, for heaven's sake, go do it. Okay. Now, he is, boy, we see this with kids on the playground often. Something happens to trigger anger, fear, sadness, the protective emotions. People who don't understand this will go to the male and say, talk to me about it. Tell me how you feel. Okay, talking is over here. He's here. Believe me, he's feeling it. He's sensing it. They sense it as deeply as females do. But he's not in the part of the brain where he's going to talk. And this is the risk for the male brain. He will kick the cat. He'll hit somebody. He'll throw something. He'll go out and crash his car. He's acting it out instead of talking it out. And so you say to him, I'm sure this wasn't any fun. When you're ready to talk about it, I'm ready to listen. And it might be a month later. But we really do a disservice to little kids, especially little boys. Parents and teachers will say to a little boy, look at me when I'm talking to you. They don't want to look at you. Males don't look at each other when they talk to each other. One's standing this way, jingling something in his pocket, and the other one's standing this way, and they're glancing at each other occasionally. It's very stressful to tell a little boy to look at me, so stop it. And if you really want them to listen, give them something to do with their right brain. Play Legos, run their little cars over the sofa, whatever. They will listen better than if you tell them to sit down, hold your hands, shut up, and listen. Won't hear anything. You want them to like church? Bring them something quiet to play with. They'll listen better. So this is starting to explain a ton of gender differences information. And if we can just get it, Dr. Gurian has been studying the brain and male-female differences, especially in young people, for years. And he has said that it may take hours to days for a male teenager to process and be willing to talk about something compared to a female who, big highway, something bad happens, talk about it this very second. Just pour it out. And we have not realized how different the brains were and how different their responses to pain, anger triggering information, sadness, and the ability to verbalize happens. Got that one? Good. When I come back again and ask how many are reading 10 minutes aloud, I'm going to ask how many remember this and are treating each other differently in terms of conversations. One last example. Women process information best by just opening their mouth and talking about it. When you give a male and a female a problem to solve or a question to answer, it takes about the same amount of time for each brain, 15 to 20 minutes, to come to a conclusion. They'll do it very differently. The woman will just start talking if she has not been shamed for that. But the first thing out of her mouth, gentlemen, is not her conclusion. She is talking her way to the conclusion. And as one woman said, I have no idea what I'm thinking till I hear myself say it. So man comes home from work and he says, my boss told me that I can have the first week off in September, so we need to plan a vacation. And he shuts up. He's processing. She doesn't know that. She opens her mouth and she says, first week in September, I know I can get that off. Okay, where'll we go? You know, I've always wanted to go to Disney World. Yeah, but if we go to Disney World, then we don't get to Seattle to see our newest grandchild. Well, that's not going to work. Okay, well, what if we... And she's just talking out loud. 5 minutes goes by. She realizes that lump on a log over here hasn't made a sound. And she's upset. She says to him, you haven't said anything. Well, if he understands this, he will say something, but this is what he'll say. I'm processing. And the male brain does this better, silently and internally. When I come to a conclusion, you will be the first I'll tell. But he doesn't know this, and so to get her off his back, he says, well, I was thinking about Tibet. Tibet? Are you out of your mind? And now they argue about Tibet. That's no more his conclusion than hers was to go to Florida. So women, if you really want to talk to him about something important, you say to him, I need to discuss this with you. Can we make a date to talk about it Wednesday night? Give him some time to think about it. Otherwise, you're going to sit there and talk, and he won't have a conclusion, and you'll likely get upset and put a lot of pressure on him, so he doesn't even want to talk to you about it when he does have a conclusion. It's so much easier to get along with each other when you understand something about the brain. One last thing. The differences in these connectome patterns are believed to occur during adolescence when puberty kicks in and the hormones that were pre-programmed start kicking in and the brain rewires itself. Because you do connectome research on children before puberty, brains look virtually the same. After puberty, they don't. Gender differences are not good or bad, right or wrong. They are what they are, and my brain's opinion is life would be really boring without them. It's the differences that are so much fun. But you choose whether you're going to get frustrated with them or whether you're going to study about them and understand them and apply them and just basically have fun with them.